Kwasi Kwartang. Now, while it would be easy to point out that he was the Chancellor, i.e. the main money man in government, who announced the mini-budget that crashed the pound to the lowest level for 37 years, that wasn't really him. That was Liz Truss following the advice of the IEA, whose comms director she hired as a special advisor. The IEA think tank is basically a bunch of disaster capitalist Brexit nutters, so what we learned from this is the need to question who's really calling the shots. Because I remember when the economy crashed with the mini-budget, and he was left holding the bag, and so I was like,
I seen this movie, the black dude dies first.
Kwasi Kwartang also taught us that it's important to have rules on politicians accepting money from places that aren't the public. Like when he tried to work for a fake South Korean company that was set up by led by donkeys.
I mean, we would definitely will be willing to pay the top of the range. So.
Okay. Well, it's particularly if I'm going to Korea, I'd expect to be compensated for that.
Yes, definitely. We will arrange all the compensations and all that. So
yeah, I mean, I'm 10,000 a day, and I'd invoice it.
Kwasi Kwartang is also an important example of the principle that not all skin folk are kinfolk. Just because he's black doesn't mean he stands up for black people or he's even a good person. There are crappy people at every notch on the Dulux color palette. They will support racism if it gets them ahead. So Kwasi Kwartang had absolutely no problem supporting a prime minister who said that Barack Obama had a part Kenyan's ancestral dislike of the British Empire and supporting a government that the United Nations says is deliberately trying to normalize white supremacy. But his greatest contribution was how he proudly announced almost every aspect of his government's fascism in less than 100 seconds. This is the interview that he gave after the Supreme Court said that Boris Johnson had acted unlawfully by shutting down Parliament, which Kwasi Kwartang refers to as prorogation, which he'd done in order to try and force through a no-deal Brexit by running out the clock.
This Brexit process has brought the courts, has brought judges, has brought lawyers into the political process to a far greater extent than any of us have ever seen. We've had people contesting judgments, people contesting the right of the Prime Minister or the circumstances in which he pushes a prorogation.
Now that bit's actually true, he just doesn't mean it the way that you and I heard it. Because yes, it is the Brexit process, led by him and the rest of the Tories, that has brought judges and lawyers into politics in a way that we haven't seen before. Mainly because the way that they conducted the Brexit process has broken laws on a scale that we've never seen before. For starters, the winning campaign, Vote Leave, that got them the Brexit vote that their entire government is based upon, broke the law during the referendum by overspending by £449,000. And Kwasi Kwartang is sitting there defending Boris Johnson for unlawfully shutting down our entire democracy to get his own way. Remember, two key elements of fascism, a disregard for the law and a disregard for the institutions of democracy. And he managed to tick both of those boxes in the first 15 seconds.
Is that the more that courts get involved in politics, that is a detriment not only to politics, but also to the court.
Again, he's being truthful, he's just framing things like a criminal. Like he's acting like the problem is the justice system, not the crimes that he and his mates keep committing. Like a Scooby-Doo villain complaining about the meddling kids. Because the truth is, yes, the more law-breaking there is in politics, the more it damages politics and our faith in it. So stop breaking the law then.
It's because many people are saying, I'm not saying this, but many people, and I'm sure Nigel Farage might have a view on this, many people are saying that the judges are biased. The judges are getting involved in politics. I'm just saying what people are saying. That's what people are saying.
Oh, I'm not sure if you caught that. He's not the one saying it. It's the people saying it. Not him. Not him, of course. No. He's just the voice of the people. Remember, a key part of fascism is populism, claiming to be the voice of the people, when really you're just pushing a very specific agenda. Whose agenda?
And I'm sure Nigel Farage might have a view on this.
Nigel Farage was constantly trying to turn people against the judges, basically saying that the law was getting in the way of what he claimed was the will of the people. And the Tories only called the referendum and started this whole Brexit mess because they were trying to take back some voters from UKIP under Farage. So just like with Truss's mini-budget, the ideas that Kwasi Kwartang was pushing weren't coming from him. This was Nigel Farage's playbook. So as we look to the future, let's not pretend that Nigel Farage and the Reform Party have clean hands in this Tory disaster. They wrote the script.
We have never seen a situation like this, where judges and lawyers are being appealed to all the time, effectively to overturn democratic mandates.
So he's complaining that people were asking judges and lawyers to undermine the democratic will of the people, right? But this was about preventing no deal, an even more extreme version of Brexit than the one we ended up with. A version that Boris Johnson literally promised people would never happen when he was telling them to vote for Brexit.
All those who say that there would be barriers to trade with Europe if we were to do a Brexit. It is totally and utterly absurd.
I even asked Kwasi Kwartang to his face whether the people who voted for Brexit would have voted for a no-deal Brexit, which would tell us whether by stopping no-deal Brexit, those judges were undermining the will of the people or protecting it. Do you think people voted for no deal?
I think people voted to leave the EU.
But specifically without a deal?
I think they voted to leave the EU. Whether we leave with a deal or without a deal is a secondary.
So all 17 million voters would have been happy with leaving without a deal? Would they all have been happy with leaving without a deal? Because if they wouldn't, then there isn't a majority for no deal. Okay, what would you say to the idea that in 2017, the majority of voters for those parties whose manifestos explicitly opposed no deal? So if Parliament were to leave without a deal, it would be going against its elected mandate. He had nothing. No evidence at all that the judges were blocking the will of anybody except the Tories and Nigel Farage. And let's be clear, the Tories back then had 42% of the vote. Together with the DUP on less than 1% of the vote, they had a controlling majority in Parliament because of our voting system. But that means they literally didn't represent the people. The majority of people, in fact 54.5% of people, had voted for parties in 2017 whose manifestos explicitly ruled out no-deal Brexit. And yet he was complaining that people from the majority were daring to use lawyers to stop him from doing something that he and his party had promised would never happen. And this right here is the most critical part of fascism, and intolerance of anybody else's viewpoints. May he never know rest or peace.